let's get after it here. So, we're not even going to try to stay on time, although I'm going to be cognizant of time. I will not run more than an hour, and I probably won't get done with what I had prepared. I asked Brenda to go back to the child care area and just ask who has to stay and who has to go at noon, because I doubt we're headed for a noon conclusion, but we'll do our best. Playing the long game with your kids one day at a time. I'm going to talk about the purpose of that title a little while later when I cover a later key principle here, okay? So what I want to do is to talk through about 4 key principles and a couple of opinions, and then as time allows at the end, to hit a few of your questions that you sent in several weeks ago in preparation. Pastor Ben is also going to hit some of those questions both in his in the topics that he's prepared to speak about today, but maybe just as well in a Q&A that he'll have at the end of his session. Okay? So, Ephesians Chapter 6, verse 4. I encourage you, if you have an electronic Bible in your lap, in your purse, on your table, look these verses up with me. They're in your outline completely, but I just encourage you, like with your electronic Bibles particularly, if you don't have these verses highlighted, if you don't look them up in your favorite translation, like I hope that a takeaway is for you to adopt the verses that I'm going to share today as being important to you. And most of them will be really familiar. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, fathers and moms, but fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Colossians 3, verse 21, fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they will not lose heart. The principle at work here is this: be careful in your relationships, in your expectations, and in the discipline that you have with your kids. Be consistent. Do not be responsible for confusion or expectations that cause anger. And note, this is specifically commanded of fathers. So let's go back and talk about that now. Like a lot of times when I teach, I give people a partial outline, and then we fill in the blanks as we go. I just gave you everything, okay? Like, if you could see my outline, I'm working off the same outline that you guys are. I don't have any hidden notes here. I'm giving it all to you. So, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Bring them up. The Greek word there is to nourish. So let's substitute that in. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but nourish them in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, what does the word discipline mean? Again, going back to the Greek. It is to be training a child, to be a corrector of a child, to be an instructor of a child. There's a single Greek reference to the word punisher of a child, just a single reference. And to be an educator of a child. Those are the different ways that this Greek word is translated in the New Testament. Okay? So, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but nourish them. Be a trainer, be a corrector, be an instructor of the Lord. Colossians 3:21, fathers, do not exasperate your children so they will not lose heart. Exasperate, what does that mean? It's not a word that we use today. The original Greek word, do not stir to anger. And lose heart, a very similar phrase. To be angered, to have rage, to cause indignation. So, fathers, do not stir your children to anger so that they will become angry, so that they will have rage, so that they will be indignant. Okay? So what's this first key principle all about? Let me talk to dads specifically first, and then we'll talk to all parents, moms and dads. So I'm a dad, so I can relate to the dads. I'm going to generalize and stereotype for a moment. So I realize when I do that, I'm not talking to every dad. You're going to say, well, I don't feel that way. I don't act that way. That's not me. I understand, okay? But just bear with me. Let me generalize and stereotype. Dads, we typically have fewer words than moms. Fewer words. We're not as verbal. We don't express ourselves verbally in the same way that many of our wives do. And because we don't express ourselves verbally in the same way, sometimes our children don't know what we're trying to communicate because they haven't heard it from us. Does that make sense? See, like in my household, and this is not a criticism of Michelle, I love my wife, but Michelle has like 5 words for every 1 word that I have. And frankly, yeah, only 5. And if you were to evaluate my family, like if you compare Allie to Sam, and I'm not going to talk very much about my kids today. It's not fair to my kids to talk about them on a day like today. Thank you. You're welcome. But I can say this, like if you compare my daughter to my son, it's not just 5 words, it's like 20 words to 1 word, right? Anyway. Dads, one way that we can really frustrate and exasperate our children, cause them to grow angry, is that we have expectations of our children that we don't really articulate. We don't verbalize it completely. And so what our kids are left to do is to try to figure out, well, what did Dad mean by that? What is Dad trying to say that Dad really didn't say or I didn't understand? Okay? When the Apostle Paul writes in the book of Ephesians and the book of Colossians about this relationship between a father and a kid, okay, how is it that we would provoke our kids to anger? Like, what could you do to make your kids angry? In the context of all of Scripture, it's not your discipline. It's not that. It's not spending too much time or not enough time with your kids. It's not any of that. It's placing expectations on your children that they can't live up to, or expectations that they don't even know exist because they haven't been clearly and consistently communicated. Here's another way that we can exasperate our children. And this is one that I learned about myself as a parent because my children gave me feedback about it when I asked. And that is that sometimes, dads, we are inconsistent in our emotional behavior. Now, that's true of moms also. So this is not a dad thing only. This is a mom and dad thing. We're inconsistent in our emotional behavior. What does that mean? It means our kids don't know how we're going to respond to something. Are mom and dad going to be safe or are they going to be scary? I'm not exactly sure. Well, if I get safe mom and dad, right? If I get sane mom and dad, then I feel like I can talk to them. And they'll be able to listen to me and their response to me won't be a scary response. But if I get emotionally unstable mom and dad, then I don't want that. So I'd rather be quiet. I'd rather be silent. I'd rather be hidden. I'd rather not expose my emotions. I'd rather not talk about my problems because what I'm going to get in return is something that is not trustworthy. Okay? So in the context of exasperation or doing things that might cause our kids to grow angry, that's the first principle at stake here. Okay? We need to be careful with the interaction that we have with our kids, particularly as we communicate expectations and as we implement discipline. We're going to talk more about discipline here in a little bit. But when I use the word discipline in this context, I'm not specifically talking about spanking. We are going to talk about spanking. I'm talking more broadly than that, okay? When we provide our kids with words of instruction, when we provide our kids with words of correction, okay, that type of discipline, are we consistent? Now, let me take a public poll here. Parents, how many of you suffer with energy? You don't have as much energy as you'd like? No, put them up nice. Have enough energy to put it way up. Okay, almost everybody in the room. I'm not surprised, okay? And again, generalizing, stereotyping, I'm guessing that's even harder with our moms and with our dads, but that's not a gender thing. Okay? Now, when we get tired, what's the first thing that goes? What's that? Our emotions. Patience. Motivation. Right? The word that I'll use, those are all good, by the way. There's no right answer here. I'll use the word intentionality. When we get tired, intentionality goes out the window. I meant to get these things done, but I didn't get them done. I didn't have the energy to be intentional about my to-do list. I meant to, and I'm not being sarcastic when I say this, I meant to get off the couch and go do this with my child. I meant to go correct my child. In my mind, that's what I was thinking I needed to do. But because my energy levels are here instead of here, I didn't do that. I didn't get off the couch. So yesterday, my energy level was a little higher. I got off the couch and got down on the floor with my kids, and I had a conversation, a correction conversation, but today I didn't. And tomorrow I will, but Friday I won't. You see the problem with that? What is that communicating to your kids about correction and discipline? It's optional. And I don't know what it is that mom and dad are correcting me from. Like yesterday I did that and it wasn't okay, and I knew it wasn't okay because mom and dad came and talked to me. But today I did the same thing and I didn't get a talking, or I didn't get a spanking, or I didn't get a whatever. So maybe it is okay. But next Thursday, mom talked to me about that again. That's exasperating our children. None of us are doing that intentionally. I never did that intentionally as a parent, but it does happen. And so I just want to put it on your radar screen. Be very, very careful and be as intentional as you can possibly be in this area about communicating expectations and communicating or providing correction to your kids. Now, any questions about that before I go on? Ben?
Another thing along with that is make sure that both parents are on the same page about what's expected.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. That's really, really helpful. I mean, and helpful is not a strong enough word. Okay? Your kids, like even your saved kids, kids are dividers and conquerors. They look for those cracks between mom and dad. Dad won't let me do that, but mom will. Mom won't let me do that, but dad will. And I want something. Where am I going to go to get it? I'll go to the parent that is more likely to provide that to me. Or mom talks to me in a way that's different than the way dad talks to me. I like the way mom talks better, so I'm going to go talk with mom, or vice versa. Again, not a gender thing. So consistency from parent to parent is really important also, both philosophically, like what are we trying to accomplish in our household, big picture, but then also implementation on a day-to-day basis. Are we doing the same things in the same way between the two of us in order to accomplish our long-term objectives? Yeah, getting on the same page with each other. And I know I don't have to say this, but I'm going to say it, okay, for you marrieds, and that's most of us in the room, okay? We got a lot of good dads in here, good, godly, Holy Spirit-led dads. So wives, get under your husbands, okay? If there's a question about who are we going to follow, mom, dad disagree a little bit, I want to do this, I want to do this. Okay, men, listen to your wives, hear them out. They have great ideas. Implement those ideas as much as possible. But if there's a disagreement between mom and dad about what needs to be done, dad, you take the lead. Wives, you get under your husband. Okay? Thank you, Ben. Any other questions or comments about that little section right there? Okay, let's go on. Second principle at work. begins with Ephesians 6:1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Hey, I thought we were at a parenting conference, not a children's conference. Hang with me, okay? Colossians 3:20. You notice these are in the same sets of scripture as we just looked at. So we looked at what this means from a parent's perspective. Okay, now from a children's perspective. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Colossians 3:20. Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Okay, I'll go on to Proverbs here in just a moment. Let me back up to Ephesians 6:1. Obey, again, original Greek, means to listen to and to be under the hand of. It does not mean children agree with your parents. Okay? It does mean listen to your parents and be under their hand. Their hand of what? Their hand of authority. Okay? Now, if Paul is communicating these things to children or to younger people, I don't know who was in Paul's audience. Okay? At the time that Paul was writing, I don't know if he's writing this with the intentionality that this is going to be shared with 6-year-olds or 16-year-olds or 26-year-olds. I don't know. But he is specific to say children, and the Greek word there for children does mean child. Okay? So if Paul is communicating, children, obey your parents, children, be obedient to your parents in all things. Why? For this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Then here's the principle at work. A child obeying a Christian parent will please God in their obedience to you. And you will want to help them please God in every way, don't you? Don't you want to help your kids please God in every way? Well, if it's pleasing to God that your children are obedient to you, then don't you desire that your kids be obedient to you? Does that make sense? Does that make logical sense, linear sense? God says, it's pleasing to me when a child obeys their parents. Parents, don't you want them to help your children obey you? Ultimately, that will be pleasing to the Lord. Now, there are exceptions, and that's why I started this little segment with God-honoring parents will want to help their children be obedient. Okay? If our children are obeying non-godly pleasing parents, then non-godly unpleasing parents are going to ask their kids to do ungodly, unpleasing things. But I just trust that that is not the spirit of this room. The spirit of this room is we want to help our kids be obedient to us. Why? Because we're obedient to God. And what we're asking of our children is the same thing that God's asking of us, and we want to start them very early in that process and please God with the way that they interact with us. Now, we actually had a very robust conversation this week between Ben and Kurt and I about salvation of children and baptism because of the last couple weeks of sermons. And one of the things that we discussed a lot was this idea of how it's very easy or convenient to train our children to be rule followers, to train the behavior of our children. Because that's the most obvious thing that we see. Our child does something physically that's disobedient. Our child does something verbally that's disobedient. And what's the easiest thing for us to respond to? What they did or what they said. Okay? And that's good. Like, we do need to respond to those things. Because what's going on outwardly with our children is often, not always, but often an indication of what's going on inside of our kids. But if we just stop right there, if we're just correcting our children's language or we're correcting our children's behavior, then we're not really getting to the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is the heart. Okay? What does it say here in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 and 2? My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. Okay? that reference to the heart there, now this is not Greek, this is Hebrew, okay? And the word heart is talked about 36 times just in the book of Proverbs alone, hundreds of times in the Old Testament. That word there is almost never referencing your literal heart, okay? The cardiovascular, almost never. So what is it referencing? It's referencing the inner person, okay? Your heart is your inner person. So when presumably Solomon writes, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart, your inner person, your inner being, okay, watch and guard my commandments." From the inside out, son, watch and guard my commandments. Not from the outside in, not from your actions or your verbal expression, but from the inside out. So parents, we have to take that approach, not correcting or leading our children from the outside in, but from the inside out. Proverbs 26, 24 through 25. He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. I had to read that verse several times to let that compute for me, okay? He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. What does that verse mean to you? Let's see if it means to you what it means to me. He who hates disguises it with his lips, lays up deceit in his heart. What does that mean? Exactly. Thank you, Matt. Outwardly, there are some things that are being said that sound like the right things to say. But inwardly, the attitude and behavior inside the inner person is not the same as what's being said on the outside. Okay? Have you ever been guilty of that? Like even maybe in an innocent way, like in a way that you didn't really intend to hurt anybody, but what you were thinking on the inside was not the same as what you said on the outside. Like, let me give you an example. If Jenna and I don't know each other, and Matt introduces me to Jenna, I might say, "Well, Jenna, it's nice to meet you."
So rude, that's your example?
Now, is it nice to meet Jenna? Well, I don't know. I mean, let's be honest. If I'm like an introverted person and I'm stuck in this situation where I have to meet Jenna, okay, it's not nice to meet her. I'm saying something on the outside that's not really reflective of what's inside. I'm just being nice. Now, we do that a lot. Just to be social, we do those things, okay? Somewhat innocently, just not to hurt other people's feelings. What's being described here in Proverbs, though, is something a little deeper, right? Like, I'm just going to say something to get through this situation right here. I'm in trouble, and I need to get through trouble, okay? I need to be deceptive because I don't like the consequences of what's real. So I'm going to say this to skate through, but inside, what's going on here is not the same as what's being spoken here. So the principle at play, again, is a child obeying a Christian parent will please God in their obedience to you. You want to help them please God in every way that you can, starting on the inside and working outwards. And that takes us to page 2, the note here that I really inserted today primarily because of the conversations that Ben and Kurt and I had this week. And that is that we are not desiring to raise legalistic rule followers. Don't be content to only train your children's actions. Train their heart. which is a lot harder thing to do. A reference that Michelle and I used when we were very, very young parents, one that we probably picked up at a homeschooling conference, I'll guess, is Ted Tripp's book, Shepherding a Child's Heart. I don't know if that book still makes the rounds today. It's probably 40 or 50 years old now. But if it hasn't made the rounds in your house, go buy the book. If you don't have $12, see me. I'll give you $12. I'll give you our copy. Shepherding a Child's Heart. Okay? The idea of the book is the same as the principle that I'm describing here. We're not shepherding outward behavior. We're shepherding the heart. We're trying to reach the heart. Okay? Questions, comments about this mini section? John.
That you would think about where, you as a parent are noticing, okay, I don't have this kid's heart.
Yeah.
And I know that's very developmentally dependent on how old the child is. What are some things that are cues?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, John, because that's a tough one. I was thinking about that myself prior to today, anticipating somebody might ask me that kind of question. Well, what would I say? What do your kids do when they don't know you're watching them? That's a really good indication. So, how do they, this happens from time to time, right? You go past your kid's bedroom or something and their door's open a little bit, and they don't know you're standing there watching them, but you're standing there watching them, okay? So in those moments, what are they doing when they don't know that you're evaluating their behavior? Specifically, when they're by themselves, are they playing in the same way that they play in front of you? Let me hypothetical example. When they're playing in front of you, they're really passive. When they're playing by themselves, they're very aggressive, anger, shouting, that kind of thing. Similarly, and this is harder to maybe monitor or evaluate. Would your kids watch and listen to the same thing in your presence as they do in your absence? That would be another indication. Now, a lot of us with really young children, our kids don't have access to watching and listening to things that are not pre-locked down by you. So as they get older, that's more of an indication as they're getting older, how much of their heart do you have? Okay, here's another indication. It's not all or none, but another indication of how much of your kid's heart do you have. When you do correct them, how repentant are they? So, not just a changed behavior or the right words for your kids to skate through that moment, but how remorseful and repentant are they when you are correcting your kids? That can be a pretty good indication of how much of their heart that you have. I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah. Other questions or comments about this section? You guys are a little quieter than I expected you to be. Give me some indication that you're tracking with me so far, okay? All right, well, that wasn't, thank you, that wasn't necessary, but thank you. Okay?
And mean it too.
Yeah, and right. Don't just say the right thing so we get through the outline. Okay. Right in the middle is probably the hardest part of what I'm going to share today. Okay? It's like the Oreo principle, right? Cookie outside, cookie inside, that little white chunk in the middle. Yeah, sort of hide it and finish up with good stuff. Best part. Okay? Discipline, specifically spanking. We're going to hit it, so to speak, right now. All right, before we get into the principle, Ben's like, I can't believe you just said that. Before we get into the principle, okay, please listen, okay? Put everything down, please listen to me. We have to start with this premise when we start with spanking, in my opinion. Who was Solomon? If we believe Solomon is who he is purported to be in Scripture, as a follower of God and as an author, then we have to believe the story of Solomon. You remember the story of Solomon? Essentially, God is like Solomon's genie. And God says to Solomon, I'll give you anything you want. What is it that you want? And Solomon says, I want your wisdom. I want to be a wise person. Now, does it stand to reason that if God gave Solomon supernatural wisdom, wisdom above and beyond any wisdom that God has ever given to us, because what he gave to Solomon was not just Holy Spirit wisdom. It was a supernatural gift of a lifetime that God gave to Solomon. So if that's true, like if that's our premise, that's true, then if Solomon says something that is directly from the wisdom of God, is that worth listening to? And if it's worth listening to, could we just suspend for a moment that we are in 2022 in the United States of America, where there's lots of wisdom, quote unquote. We need to approach this discipline, this doctrine, with the idea that what Solomon has to say about it is wiser than what a psychologist is saying in 2022, what a school counselor is saying in 2022. Now, you can disagree with me, but I would just say, as your Christian brother and pastor, if you disagree with me in this area, you are wrong. Now, I know that was strong, but I'll just say that. If you want to disagree with me, you are wrong. And the reason why I can say it that way is because you're not disagreeing with me. Like, I don't have my own opinion about this. You're disagreeing with Solomon. And that means you're disagreeing with God. That's why I say you're wrong. Now, what are we right or are we wrong about? Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. We can do all kinds of gymnastics to try to make this verse say something different than what it says. But the verse says exactly what you think it says. The rod is a rod, a club. The word club is the most literal translation in Hebrew of that word. There are some other, you can see there are some other words there that are occasionally part of the translation. Spear, scepter, staff, okay? Well, we're talking about an instrument, okay? So this instrument of discipline, our instrument, by the way, it's not our mouth. Our instrument is not time. Our instrument is a physical object. This physical object, the rod of discipline, will remove it, foolishness, far from our child. The word discipline here is the same word that we looked at before. It's the Hebrew version of the Greek word. It means to chasten, to correct, to instruct, to reproof, etc. Okay? So, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Parents, we know that, don't we? Our kids are foolish all the time. Frankly, I'm foolish all the time. It's not just a kid thing, right? Foolishness, sin, is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. What is that communicating? It's communicating that spanking is an appropriate tool to help us with discipline. Solomon then says in Proverbs 23, do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. You shall strike him with the rod and rescue his soul from hell. That's pretty strong. So, although you strike your child with the rod, what does the word strike there mean? Again, in Hebrew, it's translated with different words: smite, attack, beat, defeat, kill, slay, wound, conquer. I mean, this is not a light touch. This is a physical application of discipline that is noticeable. Okay? What does it mean to rescue? Again, translation: to snatch away, to plunder away, to deliver. So don't hold back your discipline from your child. Strike him, spank him with the physical instrument, a rod, and he will not die. You should strike him with the rod and rescue his soul from hell. So the principle at work here is withholding spanking from your methods of discipline is unwise. I said it nicer in my outline than I said it verbally here a moment ago. It's unwise. Spanking as a form of discipline is effective and it honors God. Why can we say it honors God? Because God instructed the most wise man that he ever created to provide us with instruction. Now, let me just pause, because I know that there are parents in this room that this topic is really uncomfortable. Like you've chosen to not spank your children, or you're thinking about choosing to not spank your children, or you were spanked when you were a child by an angry parent, and now as an older child, like you're still a child, right? Not living at home anymore, but as an older child, you remember it, you resent it, you know that your mom and dad did that and it wasn't a good thing. So I'm sensitive to that. I understand that. And while I'm sensitive and I understand, I also stand behind what I'm saying. I believe that this is what the Word of God says to us. Is spanking the only form of discipline that we use? No, it's not the only. Is it a tool of discipline that if we remove from our list of things that we can do, if we remove it, I think it's unwise. And I think that if we remove it, it's not only unwise, but you are taking away from your child something that will be effective to help them feel loved by you even. And ultimately, to see a part of the character of God that is important for them to see. Let's pause. Questions? Comments?
Oh boy.
Go for it, Andy. Thanks.
Okay. So, years back, I was too rough with my son. And he has a fear that I'm still working through with me. And his therapist recommended that I don't spank because he's still working through that. And so I've taken it off the table with him and also with my daughter. Go.
Yeah. So let me say that another way, or let me repeat back what I think I heard you say. Because the way that you spanked your son went a certain distance, there is now a trust issue between you and your son, and maybe a fear factor. Okay. And so you're working through that. Yeah. So that's a tough one. Okay. Andy, I think the most significant thing that you can do is to consistently demonstrate to your son your love for him, and even, and I'm sure you've done this, but even to have conversations about what happened. and to help your son to understand where you were coming from. And if you crossed lines, if like retrospectively you know I crossed lines there, to humbly apologize. And to say, son, I did this in anger, and this form of discipline is not a form of discipline to be utilized by an angry parent. It's to be utilized by a loving parent, a parent who is controlled by the Holy Spirit, right? There's the power of Holy Spirit in them at the moment that this form of discipline is being utilized. And so if in your conscience you could say, son, I made a mistake. My mistake wasn't that I spanked you. My mistake was that I spanked you out of anger, out of hostility, out of a spirit of weakness, rather than like Holy Spirit, godly power, then I'd have that conversation with him often. I mean, like not once, but particularly as you're in the future addressing sin in his life, and you're at that moment in time where there has to be some correction that takes place, and you're like even asking yourself, well, if this hadn't happened before, I'd probably be spanking my son now, but I'm not going to spank my son now, okay? I think that's a great time to have that conversation with your son, okay? And maybe even, and I'm just giving you my opinion now, right? Whatever wisdom I have, this isn't biblical. I hope it's tied into biblical principles, but I might even say to your son, Micah, right? I'm sorry, we're recording. I shouldn't say that out loud. Son, what I would desire to do that I believe would be a godly way to handle our situation is to spank you. But here's why I'm not going to do that. And to take that opportunity to walk through, this is what happened, this was the consequence, I know that we're dealing with this, I love you, son, and I regret that I have to withhold this from you. That would be an approach. Maybe others would say, no, go ahead and spank him. I want to be sensitive to that trust, perhaps, that's been broken that you're trying to restore. Carlin?
I'm not sure that we ever got to this point, but there were times where it kind of went down this road where, maybe it's a showdown over eating one bite of food or something, and you have to spank multiple times, and you're still just not getting through. Like, is there a point where you just pull the plug on that particular incident, and you're like, okay, we spanked 3 times in an hour or whatever, and so we're going to be done with this incident, and we're going to, discipline again next time? Is there a point at which you kind of pull the plug on that?
Yeah, I think there is. And again, I'm sharing an opinion now. I want to be careful and say, I think this is really my opinion versus thus saith the Lord, okay? My opinion would be that with any form of correction, you can reach a point where that's just not working, okay? And back to John's question earlier, what's the ultimate purpose of spanking? It is to capture your child's heart. So if you're at a point now where I've spanked, I haven't, in this moment, I have not captured my child's heart. How many more times do I need to spank my kid for that to happen? The answer might be none. Like, you've reached the end of what this is going to accomplish in this moment. And you've got to appeal to your child's heart at that point in a different way. Okay? So spanking is not the end-all solution for everything. It's not always going to work. That doesn't mean we take it out of the toolbox or even relegate it to only in severe circumstances. Okay? It just means that we recognize it's not always going to get us where we need to go. And we probably do need to draw the line, say, well, that's it. I'm not getting my child's heart using this method in this moment. Matt?
I guess. Well, so with spank, so I do spank, but I go back and forth on it a lot, and there's a reason, like, I guess, context for it is, like, I work with people, and on a regular basis, spanking is something that really people.
I'm sorry.
Spanking is really, it's not doing it the right way.
Yeah.
But there is a level of
hurt people.
There is, yeah, it hurts people. It can hurt people.
Yeah.
And there's a level of powerlessness that has to happen within spanking as you're engaging some level of physical action on that child. Right? That has to happen in spanking. And then sometimes, even though we're doing things the best for our ability and we're calm, you make a mistake. I think the time I made a mistake with my son where I realized afterwards I shouldn't spank him for something he did. I wasn't angry. I was doing the best I could. And there's a difference in mistake where I give a kid a timeout and make a mistake, and a difference in engaging in some sort of formal punishment on them. There's that can really have a potentially damaging, I guess I see firsthand, has a very, very damaging psychological effect on people from parents who are not abusive. Like I've worked on a spectrum of parents. It's not just parents that do really awful things to their kids. Parents that do the best they can. I guess I'm trying to figure out, there seems to be parent spanking as a form of punishment does have a significantly higher risk, or seems to have a significantly higher risk. I guess I'm just asking your comment on that. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Two things come to mind about that. The first is that it is dangerous to correct our children in anger. And our words can be as dangerous or damaging as our hand or as whatever instrument you might use to spank. In fact, in some ways, your words can be even more damaging than what's physically going along with that, right? And so we just have to be very, very careful that whenever we're correcting our children, we're doing it in a spirit of love and in a spirit of self-control. And there are times when I discipline my children where I did not do it in love, and I did it in love, but I didn't do it in a spirit of self-control. This kid did something to this kid that made me angry. I'm going after one of my kids. Okay? Not good. Not good. So that's my first response. My second response, Matt, is to go back to what I said at the beginning here, and that is that at the beginning of this little section. I recognize that what I'm saying, what we're talking about in this area of spanking is so countercultural. I just say 100 years ago, you would not have asked me the question you just asked me. And that's not a criticism of you. You just wouldn't have asked that question. 100 years ago, I doubt anybody in this room would even question the morality or ethics of spanking. Does that mean we didn't question that 100 years ago because we are less evolved as humans? No. We didn't question that 100 years ago because our society was different than it is today. And there is pressure today to essentially just let your kids do what they want to do. And I know that's not what you're saying, Matt. I'm going beyond your question now. Just let your kids be your kids. Well, how's that working out for us? As each generation of children have grown up and departed farther and farther from biblical principles, how's that working out for us? How would my grandmother say that's working out for us? Getting back to what I said at the very beginning. I think she'd say not very well. So as we depart from biblical principles, we're going to fail as a nation. And we will fail in our household. Spanking, in my opinion, and I feel confident in my opinion, is a biblical principle The question now is, how do we implement a biblical principle in a God-honoring way? We can implement the biblical principle of spanking in a way that's not God-honoring. When we do it in anger, when we do it past the point of effectiveness. Okay?
Can I jump in for a second?
Please.
Take you off the hot seat here, Brian.
That's all right. I don't even feel warm.
I'll say just a couple of things on this because I feel it. I understand it. I get it. When we are disciplining our kids, and let's say, Carlin, your question a little bit ago was, well, what if I've spanked him 3 times and this battle of wills is not working? Here's the thing. When we are disciplining our kids, we absolutely must have their heart while we are disciplining them. Not smacking them and then trying to get their heart. No, you get their heart while you're doing it, before, during, and after. So when a child is misbehaved, you grab them, say, look, buddy. And then as Tish was saying earlier, she said, lead with love. That is such a huge principle. Before you ever touch your kid, before you ever discipline your kid, you have to start with love. So you approach them, you grab them, you say, okay, buddy, what you did was a big mistake. Here's the thing that you did. And if they need to even cool down before you can even have that conversation, let them cool down, because you can't grab a heart that is just absolutely obstinate against you in the moment, right? If they're just angry and mad, okay, take a second, calm down. We're going to talk here in a little bit, but let's get you calm first. Then you can have a good conversation with them where you inform them of the wrong that they did. Then you say, I'm sorry, buddy, but this does require that I spank you, and I am going to spank you. And at that point, if you do it right, if you do it that way, then they're going to go, okay, and they accept it. Then you give them the spank, and then you reassure them, and you encourage them, and you love them, and you forgive them, and you tell them, this wasn't you. This was your me monster. The real you is an obedient kid. The real you, I love the real you, but we have to discipline the me monster. And then you encourage them, and you love them, and you accept them, forgive, move on from there.
Thanks, Ben. Ash?
We're starting to hit the point with our kids that they're getting a little bit older, and we found that taking away privileges is a whole lot more effective, especially for one of them. But obviously we also want to obey the Bible. So where's that balance? At what point do you stop spanking or stop spanking as much and start doing other sorts of discipline?
Yeah, I'll just be honest, I don't know. I mean, really, when your kids can outrun you and when they can punch back stronger than you can spank them, I mean, I'm being a little sarcastic, but I mean, there reaches a point in time where it is less physically effective, and because it's less physically effective, it's less spiritually effective. Whether that's 6, 8, 10, 12, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that question. Yeah. I don't remember spanking my children past the age of 8 or 9, and maybe it wasn't even that late. I don't ask Sam, but you could ask him. I don't know. I don't have a perfect memory on that. Yeah. I'm sure we do reach that point, and I wish I had a better answer for you than I really don't know. All right, last one. Andrea? Is that
I don't know if I can even articulate this into a good question, but I noticed with our first child, there was a very big difference between how he would respond to Matt spanking and me spanking and what that whole process looked like.
Yeah.
And I don't know the factors that went into that, if there's a personality dynamic or a mom dynamic or what. But I watched Matt and I was like, he does not try to get away from you. He does not I don't know, he just went with it. This is what's happening. But with me, it was kicking and thrashing and running, and I was like, why is that happening? I don't feel like I'm doing anything different, and maybe emotional aura or whatever. But it was very different, and I don't feel like I know why.
Yeah. So here would be the easy answer, like the cop-out answer, but probably the real answer too. The role of a mom and the role of a dad are different. And it is more the role of a father to exercise this discipline than it is the role of a mom. I think that's both the cop-out, let's answer quickly, and the real answer. God has wired men and women differently. God wires boys and girls differently. God is pretty specific in Scripture to point out that there are differences in genders and differences in roles among gender. Solomon is specific here to be talking to his sons, not his daughters. Solomon had like 900 and some concubines and wives. Like, he's a busy guy. Okay? So he didn't just have sons, he had daughters too. He may have had hundreds of daughters. I mean, literally. Thousands, I don't know. But he did talk to his sons here. Why? I just think there's a difference. Michelle?
Can I add to that? Sure. With the difference, I also think, I definitely think it was this way with my kids. Dad was, and I don't mean this in a bad way, scarier than mom. Mom's face didn't hurt. You're as bad as dad. And dad was the authority figure that was like, you don't want to disappoint dad. And I think that was
So let's see.
Real quick.
Sure.
We face the same problem.
Let's cut an advanced time. This is so
We face the same problem in a practical way that we like address it with our kids. Was we had to spank, like if I had an issue with the spanking, we would tell that for that. Like, you respect mom when she's spanking you. But we also kind of sit in on it. Like I would spank, but he would be there too. So that they would understand, like, mom is doing this under dad's authority. Like dad has given mom, like she's a conduit of me. Just to kind of help them get that message.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Last word, then we'll move on, and I'll go through everything else really, really quick. I never took one single ounce of pleasure in spanking my children. I mean, we're not talking about enjoying this part of the parenting process. Did I feel bad when I spanked my child? Every single time. No joy in it whatsoever. Maybe the difference, I hate to say this, maybe some parents enjoy spanking their kids. I mean, it's like a power thing. We're not talking about that here. Okay? So, let's continue that dialogue about spanking if you want to or you need to. And I hope I didn't, emotionally or spiritually lose anybody there. I know that this is a tough topic, okay? And I know there are differences of opinions. I just say again, I believe that my opinion is not my own. Believe I'm speaking from the truth of the word. And if you're uncomfortable with that, I just ask you to go back to the word and to ask yourself, how would I apply this principle from the word, not how do I apply this principle in 2022 in the United States of America? Is this timeless or isn't it? Is Solomon's wisdom timeless or is it not? Okay. I'm going to try really hard here, Ben. Next section. Ephesians Chapter 5, verses 15 through 16. Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most or the redeeming time, because the days are evil. President Dwight Eisenhower quoted a doctor, psychologist from Northwestern University and said, I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. And then I have a typo here, okay? The urgent is never important, and the important is never urgent, okay? This is a principle of time management that then was made much, much more popular a few years later by Dr. Stephen Covey. Many of us in the room have probably read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, okay? And Covey essentially uses the information and gives us this model of boxes where we're encouraged to be effective people, good in time management. We would sort all these things that go on in our life from urgent and important to urgent but not important to important but not urgent to not urgent and not important. Okay, that's the recreation box down there. That's when I play Stardew Valley. Okay, that's that box. Okay, now, what's the principle here? Okay, the principle is the title of what I am talking about today. Play the long game with your kids. The long game, the 20-year, 30-year, 40-year game with your kids, but play it one day at a time. Okay? As a parent, what is the most urgent thing that's going on in our house most of the time? It's solving a problem, right? This sibling hit this sibling. This one did this, that one did that, and I'm just, especially probably our stay-at-home moms, you're just like going around the house all day putting out a fire. There's lots of urgency. The urgency is often in the big scope of things, like not all that important, but it is urgent because if you don't do it now, somebody gets hurt. Okay, and so that's why it becomes urgent. On the other hand, there are some really important things that because we don't elevate them to a sense of urgency, they don't get done. And what I want to communicate here is playing the long game one day at a time means that we're just really intentional on a day-to-day basis to ask ourselves as parents, what is the big picture? Getting back to what was said earlier about moms and dads being on the same page, like big picture as co-parents, for those of us who are fortunate to have a co-parent. As co-parents, what are we trying to accomplish in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Okay? Now, how do we do that today? Because although we have 20 years, like all we have is today. So if we put off the big things, it's not urgent. I know it's important, but it's not urgent. I can do that tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. If we're just always kicking the can down the road and never elevating the important to the urgent, it just isn't going to get done because our lives are always going to feel urgent. I can talk more about with you offline there, but I just think that's so important. Take the most important things that you're trying to instill as parents and elevate those things to urgency often, or it probably won't get done. Let me end with a couple of quick opinions. Opinion number one, so not from the Bible, Brian's opinion. Don't let your children become the center of your life and the reason for your marriage. It's bad for you, it's bad for them. Now, there are some biblical principles at work here, okay? But don't let the kids become the center of your life. What are a couple practical ways that you can avoid doing that? Be selective about how many children's recreational activities you're participating in at any one time. I know parents, you know them too, that their whole schedule revolves around the kids' recreational activities. And they never have a weekend to themselves because there's a sports tournament that starts Friday night and goes through Sunday afternoon, and then they're back at work on Monday. I understand the appeal to that. I grew up playing sports. I like sports. I like sports even today. And I know this is hard to believe with what you're looking at now, but I was a good athlete when I was a kid. Okay? So that's very appealing to me. But I just think it's the wrong thing for our families. Okay? My kids will tell you they experimented with a lot of things growing up. I will talk about Sam here for a moment. Sam took piano lessons for a while, not very long, and then got into guitar, took guitar lessons for longer. Sam played baseball for quite a while, Lego League, even Awana, like that's a church activity, but it's an activity. There are probably other things that I'm like missing out on, but it was rare that we were doing more than like one of those things at a time. And Allie tried a lot of things, gymnastics and softball and dance and drama and mock trial and then obviously plays and musicals, okay? But none of those things ever dominated our lives. My advice would be don't let it dominate your life. Make sure couch time and dates exist in your marriage. It's good for you and it's good for your kids. It's good for your kids to see mom and dad spending time alone, even if they don't like it. Even if they want to crawl all over you when you're doing it. Okay? An expression of, you're wasting my time, I want your attention. Don't let them do that. It's good for them to see mom and dad alone. I imagine that 20 years from now, when all your kids are raised, you still want to be married, right? Fair statement? Okay. So make sure that you're spending time alone with your spouse, away from your kids and with your kids. It's good for you and it's good for them. You don't want to wake up 20 years from now, look at your spouse and say, now who are you again? Okay, finally, last opinion. Introduce your kids to what you enjoy and you might become really good friends and bond over the things that you like. Like, not biblical, just my opinion. I like the Hawkeyes. I like board games, golfing, nature, strategy, and music from about 1957 to about 1987. Okay? Sam and Allie like some of those things too. Why? Because they did them with me. So do the things with your kids that you like to do. Not exclusively, like do things they like to do. They are their own people. There's some things that you love that they won't like. It's terrible, but it's true. Okay? But introduce your kids to what you like. Do it with them. Bring them along. And maybe as they become adults, they will like those things too. And it gives you something to utilize, to relate to each other. Experiences in the past that you will both look back on fondly, but also experiences in the future that you can continue having because you like this and I like this, and I know you like this because I introduced you to it. And that's pretty cool. And you won't see that until your kids are older. You just got to trust me with some of that. Okay? I did my best. I'm sorry. We got Q&A that I didn't even get to. I apologize. This is a hard morning. Yeah. Abby, you got, as Ben transitions up here, I'll take this off, ask your question.
I just have a question. Well, not necessarily a question. I parent differently because I'm on my own, because I don't have that second person. So it's like, with me, it's trying to figure out how to be that second person. What advice would you give for that?
Yeah. I don't have any advice that's different than what I've already shared, which might sound like, well, okay, other than ask the question, right? I didn't say that it's more tools. Whether you're a single parent, whether you're a co-parent with a non-Christian spouse, or you're separated in your marriage, or you're divorced and, you know, your husband or your wife is still parenting, but they're not parenting with you. The biblical principles are the same. And you may not have the luxury of being able to tag team, but your authority and your responsibility is the same. And you have a harder job. And so what I would encourage you to pray for is just a lot of grace. And that all sincerity. God, help me to do this thing that I always envisioned that